Elite Facts presents
10 fascinating facts about Chernobyl the government doesn't want you to know.
10.
Oziorsk. Did you know that Chernobyl wasn't the only nuclear disaster the Soviets had? Years before the Chernobyl incident, the Soviets had another massive nuclear disaster way back in 1957 in the town of Oziorsk. This nuclear meltdown contaminated over 20,000 square kilometers. This incident was reported to be a level 6 disaster, whereas Chernobyl and Fukushima were level 7s. This easily makes it the third most serious nuclear disaster ever recorded in history. That's pretty insane when you think about it. The area was turned into a preserve to cover up the accident. The CIA knew of the accident but also covered it up in order to protect the fledgling U.S. nuclear industry from hysteria.
9.
Chernobyl operated for 13 years following the incident. Many of us mistakenly think that the Chernobyl plant was shut down for good right after the explosion. However, this is far from the truth, as the Chernobyl nuclear plant actually continued to operate up until the end of 2000. That's a whole 13 years following the incident. According to the United States Nuclear Regulatory Commission, the other 3 reactors were soon restarted following the events of the incident. They became fully functional again between October 1986 and December 1987. 4 years after all reactors were rebooted, reactor number 2 suffered a turbine building fire which inevitably resulted in its closure in 1995. 5 years later, reactor number 1 was also shut down in November of that year following pressure from many international governments. Removal of uncontaminated equipment began at reactor number 1, and this work could be completed by 2020 to 2022. Finally, the last reactor, number 3, was stopped in December of 2000. The plant as a whole ceased producing electricity. Only recently has the decommissioning phase of units 1 to 3 begun, on April 9, 2015.
8.
Cold War tension. In 1986, the Cold War was still silently raging on the land where Chernobyl stands. It's no surprise that it was carefully guarded. However, it wasn't the only protected facility in the region. There was and still is a secret missile radar built in the 1970s about 25 miles from Chernobyl that's now part of the exclusion zone. Its intention was to detect missiles being launched from as far away as the United States. Civilians were prohibited to approach within a few miles. Around 1,000 soldiers and officers who worked there lived in a tiny town with a single street known as Kurchatov Street. All of them and their families were immediately evacuated after the disaster, but the station remained standing tall. The structure was initially ordered to be demolished. However, the plans were rescinded under concerns that the tremors would damage the Chernobyl sarcophagus.
7.
Raising the flag. Towards the very end of the cleaning up process in Chernobyl, 3 men were forced to do a task that no other person in their right mind would do willingly. The task they were given was to travel to the top of Reactor 3's chimney to hang a red flag. Prior to these 3 men making the trip to the top of the tower, a group of liquidators had already made 2 fruitless attempts by helicopter. Due to high radiation levels, the entire operation had to be timed to last no more than 9 minutes, as being exposed to that much radiation could prove fatal. Radiation expert Alexander Yortchenko carried the pole, followed by Valery Starodumov with the flag, while Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Sotnikov ascended on the radio. These 3 individuals were successful with their mission. Their reward at the end of this job was a refreshing bottle of Pepsi and 1 whole day off. Back then, this was classed as a luxury. By today's standards, that's a ripoff.
6.
Reactor number 4 sarcophagus. In an attempt to contain any potential explosions from damaging the surrounding areas of Chernobyl and beyond, government officials decided to erect sarcophaguses to enclose Reactor 4. Originally, when the first sarcophagus was built in 1986, it was constructed hastily and in harsh conditions. Not surprisingly, the sarcophagus was pretty much ready to crumble from the get-go. Because of this, it was decided that a new shell would be built around it, with more thought and care than the previously built one. Originally announced in June 2003, a new steel containment structure named the New Safe Confinement would be built to replace the aging and hastily built sarcophagus that protected reactor number 4. Though the project's development has been delayed several times, construction officially began in September of 2010. Novarka is building a giant arch-shaped structure out of steel, 270 meters or 886 feet wide, 100 meters or 328 feet high, and 150 meters or 492 feet long to cover the old crumbling concrete dome that is currently in use. The construction of a new shell was only just completed in 2016. The new structure is being built alongside the plant and will be relocated by rails to allow the deconstruction of the old shield. The cost of the whole project was around 1.54 billion euros.
5.
Wildlife. So we're sure that most of us at some point have wondered what's happened to the wildlife that inhabited the areas surrounding Chernobyl. Well, really, nothing for most animals. Now, sure, while countless birds and animals were initially killed by the radiation, current living conditions for the wild animals in the exclusion zone are not so conclusive. While there are fewer species of birds and some present have been severely physically affected, some other species are actually thriving. With no humans around, Pripyat became a haven for wild animals such as wolves, beavers, and other animals looking to make a home in the ghost town.
4.
Residents of Chernobyl. Over 100,000 locals were relocated right after the accident, with thousands more to follow. However, around 1,200 people, most consistently older women, decided to stay or run back home. The reason for this, revealed during several interviews, was for the simple reason that they loved their native land. According to CNN, these women illegally returned to their failing cottages because they received only meager financial support from local authorities and simply needed their land to survive against starvation. Some of them were allowed to stay, half illegally, because they were past childbearing age. Surprisingly, not only did they survive the long aftermath of the accident, but they're still alive today in their 80s and even 90s.
3.
Plant life. Considering animals are living quite freely in Chernobyl without any repercussions, you'd think plant life would be quite similar. Well, as it turns out, following the disaster, genetics and botanical experts noted that plants in the area had become victims of gigantism. The monster plants were removed by natural selection. Even the fishes, which were found dead due to radiation exposure, were abnormally large and flabby.
2.
Chernobyl incident statistics. The Chernobyl accident is the most serious accident to have happened in the history of the nuclear industry. Indeed, the explosion that occurred on April 26, 1986, in one of the reactors of the nuclear power plant and the consequent fires that lasted for 10 days led to huge amounts of radioactive materials being released into the environment and a radioactive cloud spreading over much of Europe. The greatest contamination related to the incident occurred around the reactor in areas that are now part of Belarus, Russia, and Ukraine. Since the accident, an estimated 600,000 people have been involved in emergency, containment, cleaning, and recovery operations, although only few of them have been exposed to dangerous levels of radiation. Those who received the highest doses of radiation were the emergency workers and personnel that were on site during the first days of the accident, which is estimated to be around 1,000 people.
1.
The beginning of the end for Chernobyl. In the early hours of that spring day, all hell broke loose, and hundreds of firefighters were attempting to stop the generator fire. An estimated 300 tons of water was pumped every hour into the remaining part of the generator, which was damaged beyond repair. According to the World Nuclear Association, they stopped after half a day due to the danger of flooding reactors 1 and 2. In the following days after the incident, the exploded reactor was still burning, so about 5,000 tons of boron, clay, sand, dolomite, and lead were poured over it by helicopters in an effort to stop the fires and cover the radioactive elements.
Don't forget to like us and subscribe for more Elite Facts.